Welcome. I'm doing a tutorial on Visual Basic, and I'm just aware that we need more tutorials like this, where at least we can get to understand the concept of how our Visual Basic works and some of the things that we need for our Visual Basic. So, for example, we want to make a simple crude example where we can be able to create, update, delete, among other features. So we can add features as we go. But there's this application here that I wanted to use as a reference. So basically what this simple application does is it creates a username and the level of use. So you can be able to add, edit, delete, search, go to next, previous, last, and close. So for example, if I click on add, it will then tell me to add a username, and the username that I must put must have reference within this particular section here. So it doesn't work because some of the settings on my machine are not the same as what was used when this was created. But for the purposes of an example, I can say the first user is an admin, and their password should contain the following. So we can put a capital letter G, K, 2020, exclamation mark, and then we can put a 0. Okay, if I click on OK, or rather enter then takes me to OK, and then it tells me what level do you want this person to be at. So I can select 1, I click on OK, then it's supposed to take me to a database, and then the database will then store whatever information that I want it to store. So basically this is a simple but basic application that we can work with. So we want to create something similar. We'll borrow some content from this, but what we don't want, we will also exclude. So let's get started. I'd already created my project, sorry for that, and then we can build from there, because I'm assuming since we've been doing the series together, we now know how to navigate our way around certain things. So let's do it this way. So the first thing that we'd want is, I liked the outline or the border of the previous project, where I think we can also do exactly the same, and that outline is called a group box. So this is how we actually add our group box. We can put it that way, and then let's add another group box. So as we are working with our code, or as we are working with our Visual Studio, it allows us to do the following first, which is actually work with our interface, and then from our interface we can be able to go to the back end and create our code. So as it stands, we're actually now working with just our interface, and we want to design some of the attributes that we want. So for the first group box, we want this to display data. We want the second one to give us the options, for lack of a better word. So we've got display data, we've got our options. We want to still have more or less the same look and feel of some of the things that we saw there, but we'll play around with them as we proceed. So at the same time, each element can actually be renamed. So for example, with our group box 1, let's go to the name property, and then we call this grb display. We go to the next one and we call this grb options, like that. And then we want to put our buttons and the next few elements. So the next element we want is the data grid view, where we can select doc in parent container so that it actually fits in this aspect, and then we also need to rename it. So this becomes DGV display. So as you might have noticed, each element that I'm taking the original name and then adding an extra value to it so that it becomes something that I'll remember or I'll be able to use when I'm working with my code. So for example, I can also name my form 1. I can then call this FRM crude, like that. So this then becomes the name of my form. Let's just run the program briefly so that everything works together. Hopefully we did not create any errors when we were working with this. Yes, we did. Okay, so let's go there. No, we don't want to go to the internet. Yes, it's because I've changed this. Let's actually just change it back to form 1. Let's see. So you see why the naming is quite important. I'd actually just changed the name of the form and it refused to have my code running. So the moment I put it back to form 1, we are good to go. So let's just close that and let's get into our content. So we want to add some more items, and the next element we want are buttons. Okay. Here we go. So maybe let me start over. I want to do it individually so that we can catch up or pick up as we proceed. So the first one is our first button. We want this to be our create button. That's the text we want for the text property. And for the name property, we want this to be btn create, like that. From there, maybe we want to just make our button a little bit bigger, and then we can work with our button like that. So we can also copy this button and paste it, and now we have a duplicate of the same button, but it creates a new instance of the button. So we don't have exactly the same button. We've got exactly the same text, but it's a new button now. As you can see, the name property is changed to button 1. So we can go there and say btn, and then this becomes a read, because we want this button to be able to read. And we also want to come to the text property and change that to read. We can also do the same and paste another button, and then this then becomes, the text property changes to update, and then the button name, we change that to btn update. We paste again. We want the next button to be delete. So it's btn delete. And we want the text property to also change to delete as well. So we've got create, read, update. In the other document we had search. I think let's also put search there, and we'll eventually work with how this should look. So we go to our text property, we put search. We also go to our button property and we put search, like that. I think it also looks kind of clumsy. I think for most of our interface we are done. We'll just play around with it for a few elements. For example, we want to resize. As you can see, I can just click on the edge. I then move this to the edge so that it sort of looks that way. I can also change the name of my form, which is the text property. I can then say user details, like that. So I can safely say I've done my interface. We could add a few things to this so that it looks a bit more. So we need to just modify a couple of things, and here are some of the things that we need to modify. We need to change this icon. So the last thing we would want, or it's a continuation from the icon, we want to change the icon that we've got there and put a different one. So as you can see, this is our default icon. We want to get an icon from another project. So I go to my shoes, I select that icon, and as you can see, I've actually changed the icon for my form. If I click on start, I can then be able to view my application with the new icon that I've actually added there. So basically you can download what are called ICO files that can help you to play around with your icons and how they look, among other things. Okay, let me just close that for now. The next element we want to do is maybe play around with our buttons a bit. We want to change a few properties. So the first property we want to change maybe for now, let's just leave it as is, and we then want to be able to go to the next section, which is creating our database. So our database will now help us to link our interface with the functionality of what we hope to achieve. The first element would be to know what attributes we want to have displayed. We can have the username, we can have the password, we can also have the level that this person is at, we can also have their name and their surname. So these are some of the aspects that we want to have within our project. So how we can do this whilst we have not started with the database, we can simply go to data sources, we go to add new source, we want a database, we also want a data set, we create a new connection, access data file, we click on continue. Since we don't have a database, we need to then come to our Visual Studio projects, and then we create our database here. So we can't actually create a database this way because this just gives us a connection. Maybe let's pause that for now. Let's come to our project folder, which is in Visual Studio projects, crude example. We want to save our database there. So let's go to Microsoft Access. Here we'll create our database and we'll call it crude DB, like that. We want to save it in our projects. We want in our bin, we want it to be in our debug. and I want the old version of the database, which is MDB. I click on OK. I then click on create, so that we create our database in the right manner. And then in our database, we want to be able to have two tables. So the first table, we want this to be our user. And then we go to create again. We want to create the next table, but I think since we've already started with the user, let's finish up with the user, and then we go to the next attribute. So we want the first name. Don't use just name, because name is a reserved word. We put surname. It's a short text. We want a username. We also want a password. Then for each user, we want to know what level they're at. So like we saw in the previous program, there was a level. So let's say we then put our level. We also make this a short text. So we can save this aspect. We can go to table by design. We then have a level ID, and then we have a level name. That then becomes the next set of our database, and then this we call it row, like that. So we would want to then map a relationship as well, whereby we want to map the role and the user. So if you come to relationships, we can click on add. We also click on add. We click on close. So we want the level name to be similar or to be linked to our level. We click on OK. We can now close our database. Yes. Okay. So now that that is done, we now have our database, which is there. We can now come back to this section, and we then now want to put some context or some content into our project, which is the crude example. So I think in the next lesson we can be able to just work together so that we get to complete this project.